Today, before I begin, I've decided that I want to try something a little different. I felt like I didn't do 119 a lot of justice. So instead of going through every single one, which gets a little repetitive, I'm going to try to do one letter a day for the next 22 or so days. Now that means one, well, yeah, and I say one letter, I'm meaning 8 verses. For example, Alf, then Beth, then Gimel, then Daleth, then He, then Va. So today I'm going to read Alf. Blessed are the undefiled in the way who walk in the law of the Lord. Blessed are they that seek his testimony and that seek him with their whole heart. They also do no iniquity that walk in his ways. Thou hast commanded us to keep thy precepts diligently. Oh, that my ways were directed to keep thy statutes, that I may not be ashamed when I have respect unto all thy commandments. I will praise thee with uprightness of heart. When I have learned thy righteous judgments, I will keep thy statutes. O forsake me not utterly. And again, imagine a child reading this, you know, 6 years old, 5 years old, whatever, and they're learning diligence and they're learning trustworthiness in the Lord. So it's a very interesting thing to see that that's what's going on here. And I thought I might do one of these a day just to cover them. Today, we're also looking at Psalm 120, only 7 verses. I really don't like that they do this song of deliverance and all this kind of stuff. Well, that's not exactly right. Whatever the psalm says, that's the conclusion you draw, not something that a third party has said. In my distress, I called upon the Lord, and he heard me. Deliver my soul from lying lips and from a deceitful tongue. When you read this one, he's talking about being amongst people who are lying about God, being among people who are telling falsehoods about him as he worships God. What shall be given unto thee, or what shall be done unto thee, thou false tongue? He's not talking about his false tongues. There are false tongues around him, lying. Sharp arrows of the mighty, with coals of juniper. Woe unto me that I sojourn in Medesh, that I dwell in the tents of Kedar. My soul has long dwelt with him that hateth peace. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. So he's saying here that sojourn in Meshes and dwell in the tents of Kedar. There's an area north of Jerusalem called Meshesh, and it's closer to Syria, and where a lot of people were there who were Canaanites or who were pagans who did not worship the one true God, Jehovah, and they spoke badly of him and lived badly. It's almost like they picked things that were opposite of him, and that's how they lived their lives. Also, Kedar was down in the south among those Bedouin people. They were nomads, but also they were people who did not believe and lived their lives against the laws of God and spoke against him. And these people were at war against him. They were at war with Jehovah. They were against him. So you see this happening here. And so that's what he's talking about, that he's among lying men with lying tongues, and it's very hard for him at this time. So we're seeing this is here's a man sitting among pagans who hate God, and yet he's standing for God, and how horrible that is, how hard that is, and how he's calling to God. Now this is a prayer for deliverance, but let's look at it for really what it is. If you ask somebody, what is Meshesh, what is Kedar, they're like, I don't know. You know, the interesting thing I've noticed is once I learned more geography this time through, when they say things like that, I can think of a geographic region where people think a certain way. I know in America, if you talk about going up to Boston, or you talk about going down to LA, or if you're going to go up to Seattle, different groups of American thinking and living in slightly different ways, and you understand the different cultural differences there. Living in Chicago versus living in a small town in Oklahoma. Totally different lifestyles and different ways people live in the same countryside. So that's 120. Look it over. We're starting 2 Samuel. And again, 1st and 2nd Samuel were once one booklet, cutting it in half because of the two kingdoms, and we see the end of the kingdom of Saul officially. We will find that he has some sons through concubines, I think. When it says his sons died in battle, I think those were sons from wives, but there's a son coming up called Ishbosheth who will be a puppet put in power, and so he will just be given power. But we see that there's an interesting story starting off that remember, David had gone and his family was taken from Ziklag by the Amalekites. He chases after them, wins the day, wins all of them back, and now they're safe. Everybody's safe from Ziklag. and he brings them back, and he takes the spoil and hands it off to Judah. Now, this is an interesting ploy. It's not so much, it turns out to be a good political move, but he didn't know at the time that Saul was going to die. He's just sharing the wealth of what he's got with his kinsmen in Judah, with his kinsmen in the area, because he is from Judah, from Bethlehem. And after David came back from the slaughter of the Amalekites, he abode 2 days, and a man came with his rent clothing. And David said, "Why have you come?" He said, "Out of the camp of Israel." He says, "How is the matter? I pray thee, tell me what's happened." The people that fled, and he said, "The people fled from the battle, and many people were fallen, and Saul and Jonathan, his son, are dead also." So he's giving David the bad news that that he has died, that Saul has died, and that Jonathan is dead. You're handing this news to him. And how do you know this? And now we get into a problem. How do you know this? And so he starts telling the story, and I think the story is a lie. I think that he may have seen certain things, but he's trying to endear himself to David. And you'll see that as he's talking. "I just happened by chance to Mount Gilboa." Well, all right, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. "And I saw Saul leaning on a spear, and lo, the chariots and horsemen were around him hard." He could have seen that. "And he called unto me, and I said, Here am I." And he goes, "Who am I?" And I said, "I'm an Amalekite." Okay, possibly that happened. "I pray thee, fall upon me. I'm in anguish, but my life is let whole." Now we know that Saul actually called for his armor bearer to kill him. There was no mention of an Amalekite, and certainly the king of Israel would not have had an Amalekite armor bearer. So here we have this, and so we have David doing this, and this man's telling the story. "So I'm in anguish, so I fell upon him, and I killed him." And so he's saying that he killed the king. Now he thinks this is going to make David happy. I'm endearing myself to the king because I killed the king's enemy. This is an Amalekite who doesn't know what's going on, who doesn't know the heart of David, who doesn't know about the anointing and the kingship and all this stuff. He says, "I killed him." He thinks he's going to get something for it. And David took hold of his clothes and rent them, and they mourned and wept and fasted for Saul and Jonathan and all the people, for the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. David said that to the young man, "Whence come thou?" And he says, "I am the son of a stranger and Amalekite. How were you not afraid to stretch forth your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? Fall upon this man." So he has his men fall upon this man and kill him. As David said to him, "Thy blood shall be on thy head, for thy mouth has testified against thee. I have slain the Lord's anointed." So David hears, again, this guy tells the story that he thinks he's going to get some money for it. He thinks he's going to get something for it. He doesn't understand the tone, the timbre of what's going on here, and David falls upon him and kills him. And the ironic thing is that he didn't even do it. He didn't even kill Saul. He dies for no reason because he said he did. And David has no reason not to believe him. He doesn't know exactly. It's only found out later, I guess, through historical record of what really happened. But okay, he's taking this at face value, and he's moving on it with face value. He shouldn't lie to the king. So he laments over David and Saul, and I really like this lament that we see going on here, because he has beautiful things to say about Saul. You would think that because he was such an enemy, because he created so much struggle, because he drove him out from his people, because he created so much hardship, because there was so much struggle, that he would have hard things to say about him. But he says very beautiful things. The beauty of Israel is slain upon the high places. How are the mighty fallen? And he's calling him mighty. He's remembering these guys as strong and victorious. How he bade teach the children of Judah to use the bow, and behold, it's written in the book of Jasher. The idea that he taught them, that he was for the protection of Judah. He was for Judah. He's reminding them of that. "Tell it not in Gath, publish it not in Ascalon, once the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph." So don't tell this down in the south yet. They're going to jump around and rejoice over the death of the king, and that's not something we're doing. "O ye mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew, and neither let there be any rain upon you, nor the fields of offering. For there shed the shield of the mighty is vilely cast away, and the shield of Saul, as though he had not been anointed with oil." Beautiful things that he's saying here about Saul, beautiful things that he's saying here. And again, when you understand the mountains of Gilboa, you understand that he's talking about the history here, geography here. And it's really wonderful what's happening here, how he speaks so beautifully and eloquently of this man that you would think was his enemy. The blood of the slain has fallen by the mighty, the bow of Jonathan has not turned back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty. Saul and Jonathan are lovely and pleasant in their lives, and in their deaths they are not divided. They are swifter than eagles, they are stronger than lions. The beauty that he says here, how he loved these men and had wonderful things to say about these men. It really speaks well. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul. He clothed you in scarlet with other delights. He put ornaments on you and gold upon your apparel. He's talking about the goodness of Saul, how Saul did good for Israel. Again, we sometimes, and I'm guilty of this sometimes in Christianity, of really downplaying Saul, as an example of a bad guy, an example of someone who didn't believe God, an example of a bad believer, and yet David never picks on him. How the mighty have fallen in the battle, O Jonathan, thou hast slain in distress with thee, my brother Jonathan. How pleasant thou hast been unto me. Thy love for me was wonderful, passing the love of women. This is misinterpreted so terribly to imply the horribleness that these men were homosexuals. It is horrible to think that these men had such a deep love for one another and a cherishing of one another. Oh my gosh, they had, that's the deepest love we can think of. No, there's a deeper brotherly love. To love him more than women is not saying I prefer him over sex. There's times when men will stand and men will go into battle and men will work side by side with men and create such a rapport that it's different than having a rapport with a woman. Even with your wife, it's different, and it should be. Men should have best friends that they do things with. Men should have men that they can fight in and that they can cherish being around, that they can work and play with. It's very important to the man's psyche that he have this. And it's important for the church to have men that will stand with men and love more differently and maybe even deeper than they do their wives. Wives are a different thing. We've always been told that in this gynocentric world that your wife is your best friend. Your wife is your best friend. You should have a best friend. You should also have a wife. And this is the way they are, but sometimes your wife isn't your best friend. She can't understand what it's like to be a man, and you can't understand what it's like to be a woman. She needs to have a best friend woman that she can turn to. How the mighty have fallen and the weapons have perished. In chapter 2, we see that he comes back with his family, and Judah anoints him as king. This is the beginning of a split kingdom here that will move on. It will come together under Solomon. David will bring it together also after a while. But we have it split for a while. We have a little bit of a polite and impolite civil war. And so they come together in Judah, and they anoint him king. He speaks well of the men of Jabesh Gilead that buried Saul. Again, we talked about that at the end of 1 Samuel, that the men of Jabesh Gilead saw what had happened, how horrible it was, and they traveled. And the thing is, Jabesh Gilead, it's up north near Amnon. They came down to get, when they heard about what happened to Saul, they came down, got his body, and got Jonathan off of a wall and went back up and buried them, burned them and buried them. And he talks well of them, that you've shown kindness unto the Lord, even Saul, and have buried him. May the Lord show kindness and truth unto you. I also will require of your kindness, because you've done this thing. Therefore let your hands be strengthened, and be ye valiant, for your master Saul is dead, but also the house of Judah has anointed me king. So he makes peace and calls them valiant men. He's drawing them in politically, but also he recognizes the strength of what they did for God. But there is a war coming. It's a very polite one. I said that earlier because it's really not a hot war yet. We have characters coming into play. We're going to meet Abner. We've already met him once. He becomes a captain, and the military took Ishbosheth, the son. We don't even know what this guy is. We don't even know where it comes from. He's more of a figurehead that they put in, and he reigns for, I think, 2 years. And he was 40 years old, and he was just put in more as a puppet. Abner was the captain of the military, and David had been made king over Judah. So you have the tribes have their king, and Judah has his king. And Abner is the son of Ner. He's of the servant. He's with Ishbosheth, and you now have Joab. We're meeting Joab for the first time. He is the captain under David, and he has 3 brothers. We're going to meet them in a minute, or 2 brothers, Abishai and Azarel. Abishai and Azrael. And Azrael was light as a foot and wild as a roe. He can move fast and quickly. We find that these two groups meet and near a pool at Gibeon. They're together, you know, and they decide to have a little fight, a competition. So they get young men together to fight to the death. So they grab 12 men, put them in, 12 from Benjamin that were from Ishboeth, and 12 of the servants of David. So 24 men get out and fight to the death as the other men watch. And every man caught his fellow and thrust his sword in his fellow's side. And there came a sore battle that day. The men rose up and went to battle, and they were fighting with one another. And Azrael was chasing after Abner, and Abner saying, "You better stop following me," but he wouldn't stop. "You better get off me. I don't want to kill you because of your brother's sake, because of the relationship I have with Joab." You know, they were kind of peers in a sense, although they were on the different sides of the track. Azael would not stop. So finally, Abner turns around and kills Azrael. And this is not going to go well with his relationship, of course, that he was wanting to keep this peace with Joab. So the house of David and the house of Saul under Ishboeth are fighting. The captains are out there fighting. And they're up there near Gibeon. And the children of Benjamin gathered themselves together after Abner and became one troop and stood at the top of the hill. But Abner calls for peace. Abner says, "Can the sword devour forever? Knowest thou not that it will be bitterness at the latter end? How long shall it be ere thou bid the people return from following their brethren?" So he's saying to Joab, how long is this going to go on till you call it off? And Joab says, "As the Lord lives, unless you had spoken, surely that when in the morning people will be gone up, every one from following their brother." So he was planning on stopping the battle the next day, but Abner calls for a stop then, a ceasefire. So Joab blows the trumpet, goes his way. Abner and his men walk all that night through the plains, and they go home. Abner returns from following Abner, and he lost 19 men, but Abner lost 360. So you see the battle really went for David and his men in this sense. Of course, they did lose Asahel. They took up Asahel and buried in the sepulchre of his father that was in Benjamin. And Joab and his men went all night back to Hebron. And you know, Hebron is down south in Judah, is down south of Jerusalem. We meet these people. We're going to see these characters, these conflicts. This tension between these captains is going to come up. There's a lot of things being set here in the story of the rise of David and the rise of his kingship and the rise of his kingdom. We're just setting this up. Chapter 3 tomorrow when I go through it begins with, "And there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David." So we see this moves on. Sometimes it's a hot war, sometimes it's a cold war, sometimes it's just politics going back and forth. But this is the beginning of the formation of the kingdom of David. It was not without blood, it was not without turmoil. And so we see that God is working this out. He's working this through David. This whole thing was all because when we go back to Samuel, the people wanted a king. So much blood is being shed because the people want to do things the way they want. Had they gone to God as their king, they could have saved all this. So we need to realize that we see God working within here. People yell, "God is sovereign, God is sovereign." He didn't choose to do this way, but he's willing to work with man. He will not leave his promise of establishing this land for Abraham. That promise made to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 sons will come to pass. But if he has to go through this silly, stupid, painful, bloody kingdom setting up with these parameters, he'll work with it, but he will not leave his promise. So God did not choose this to be this way, but he's working with sinful men. He's working to establish, and he's working through. He's always been working through sinful men, because that's all there are. Excuse me. But we're going to see this kingdom grow, this kingdom become. We're going to learn these characters and learn these characteristics. And it's not just that God wants to show us things here. He wants us to see some things about himself. He wants to see him in this. Many times his heart will be seen where he's, be mourning or where he's sad. I don't think he was happy about, he says he repented him that he made Saul king. But he's working with David. He's looking for a man after his own heart to lead Israel, and that's what he's fighting for. And he never really gets it here in this plane. But the man Jesus come, a man after his own heart, and he will be this perfect king. He is this perfect king. So let's keep rolling through this. We'll see what it's saying, and we'll learn from it. But the goal is Jesus, and the goal is the establishment of the promise of God. That's the goal. Thank you.